Welcome back to Savvy Psychologist. I'm your host, Dr. Monica Johnson. Every week on this show, I'll help you face life's challenges with evidence-based approaches, a sympathetic ear, and zero judgment. This week, we're going to discuss how to feel bad. After hearing the intro to this episode, you might be thinking, but I already know how to feel bad, Dr. Johnson. I came here to figure out how to feel good. Hear me out. I recently saw Time magazine's cover of Naomi Osaka, and her quote was, "It's okay to not be okay." I was inspired. I tell my patients all the time, it's normal to feel bad sometimes. And what it's really about is how we treat ourselves when we are not feeling our best. When it comes to our mental health, many of us take the approach of, I'm sad and now I'm going to be angry with myself or judge myself for feeling this way. This approach is completely ineffective, exacerbates your mood state, and inhibits your ability to address the core issue and heal. It's like waking up with a cold and deciding to break your own arm in response. I want you to listen to me very carefully when I say this. It is entirely normal to feel bad sometimes. You're not weak or silly or deserving of pain because of it. It is simply a consequence of living that we must all learn to radically accept. I was once talking to someone who plays roller derby, and they told me about how they had to learn how to fall. If you know how to fall, you can do it in a way that reduces the impact and likelihood of serious injury. You can apply this concept to your mental health. Let's talk about a few ways you can do that. Tip number 1, change your mindset. Your mentality about experiencing unwanted emotions is key here. It's important to address yourself with compassion when you are in this state. Instead of screaming at yourself, "What is wrong with me?" say instead with care, "What do I need?" If you have this approach, then it helps to eliminate the anger and judgment that I mentioned earlier, because you are assessing yourself with an open hand instead of a closed fist. Tip number 2, use your 5 senses. I am a dialectical behavior therapy or DBT specialist. One of the skills I teach in DBT is self-soothing through your 5 senses. The goal of this skill is to be kind to yourself by engaging in comforting or pleasant activities to provide relief from mental strain. This skill makes it much easier to get through a low period without making it worse. I usually encourage my patients to write down things you can do in each of the sense categories. Now let's review some examples together. The first sense is sight. So you'll want to think of things that are visually pleasing. This could be pictures of family or friends, going to a museum in person or online to look at art, spending time in nature, people watching at the park, or window shopping. With hearing, you can listen to music you find soothing. The type of music you select is entirely up to you. My patients have chosen everything from elevator music to death metal. It's important to identify what calms your spirit, and it's okay if it's Sarah McLachlan or Slayer, and everything in between. Nature sounds like a rainstorm or crashing waves. The repetitive hum of a fan or white noise machine could also be helpful. I've had some people swear by ASMR, which is autonomous sensory meridian response, so that can also be a choice. You could listen to guided meditations, your favorite psychology podcast, or just call a friend. Smell is often an underrated sense, but don't skip this one. So many positive or negative responses that we have are linked to smell. If you've ever been on a New York City subway on a very hot day, then you know what I'm talking about. Examples here can include aromatherapy, literally smelling the roses, lighting a scented candle, using scented lotions, and brewing some coffee or baking bread and taking in the aromas. In contrast, taste is one that we often overdo, so you want to be careful with this one. particularly if you have a problematic relationship with food. You can drink some tea, eat some of your favorite comfort foods, or even simply suck on a peppermint. I would add that whatever you do it mindfully and savor the experience, as it will help you moderate your eating. The last thing we want to do is overeat and then guilt ourselves for doing so. The goal here is to comfort, not criticize. Finally, there is touch. There are so many ways we can utilize this sense. You can hug someone or yourself, pet a real or stuffed animal, or use a weighted blanket. Taking a hot shower is great as well. I have often talked about getting a square of fabric like velvet or satin, or if you prefer harder textures, a stone or crystal that you can keep with you and caress or squeeze in the palm of your hand to soothe yourself. My last advice here is to do what I call stacking your senses to heighten the experience of self-soothing. So what does this look like? You could take a warm bath with scented candles and soothing music, which would combine smell and hearing. Another example could be eating a delicious sandwich in the flower garden at your favorite park, which would stack your taste, smell, and vision. Tip number 3, making a move. Then there's movement, which some have called the sixth sense. As I'm sure you've often heard, there's a strong mind-body connection. We carry much of our mental pain in our bodies, so it's logical we could use motion to care for ourselves when we feel bad. The first example I will talk about here is an OG, rocking. It worked when you were a child, and I have yet to encounter an adult who doesn't enjoy a good sit down in a rocking chair. You can do this in a standard chair as well. Yoga is beneficial if you're capable of doing this form of exercise. I'm a fan of yin yoga, but all forms are good based on your preferences. Other examples are walking and dancing, which I encourage you to do often, whether you feel bad or not. What are some of the ways in which you use your 5 senses to self-soothe when you feel bad? Let me know on Instagram at KindMindPsych, or send me an email at psychologist@quickanddirtytips.com, or call in at 929-256-2191. The Savvy Psychologist is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast. It's audio engineered by Steve Rickyberg with script editing by Beata Santora. Our operations and editorial manager is Michelle Margulis, our assistant manager is Emily Miller, and our intern is Claire Freeman. Follow Savvy Psychologist on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, you can email me at psychologist@quickanddirtytips.com. You can also leave a message at 929-256-2191. Be sure to tell me if it's okay to use your voice on the show. That's all for this episode of Savvy Psychologist. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.